Okay, thank you, everybody. Where we're going next is as important as it gets, and it's something actually that occupied much of the Blockchain Association's work over the past year. And national security and terrorist financing is one of those things that isn't going to go away probably ever. And we're reminded of that by congressional Democrats in almost every meeting that we have with them. And it got serious over the past year when two very, very senior and serious Senate Democrats, one being Senator Mark Warner from Virginia, the top Democrat on Intel, and the other being Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, who is the chairman, about to be ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, decided to get serious and to take a very, very deep look at money laundering, crypto, and terrorist financing. And they introduced, or they teased legislation. They met with our industry, they met with stakeholders, and as they said personally to us in both professional and in social settings, they are doing this for the right reasons. They are doing this to solve a problem, which they do believe is a problem. And we have said to them many times, every dollar spent through illicit means along the blockchain is one that we condemn as well. And so we're trying to work with those offices and myth bust and get to a place of consensus. But it's hard. And it's hard to do it in the peer-to-peer economy, and we're trying to make that known and work with their staffs. And coming up to talk about this are two tremendous people in our space, and one of them is a household name. Jason Somensatto is the head of policy at Chainalysis, head of policy for North America, and he's one of our board members at BA. Jason is a tremendous resource and has seen it all. And joining him, and this is a very special privilege, is Jon Lenzner, who is the chief of staff at the FBI. And Jon is tremendous also, and he, like so many others in Congress and in the law enforcement community, know that our partnerships with law enforcement and with our analytics companies are real. They result in seizures. They result in collaboration that we are proud of. And Jason and Jon are here to talk about that. Please welcome Jon Lenzner and Jason Somensatto.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks everybody for joining us. As Dave mentioned, I'm Jason Somensatto. I am honored to be joined by Jon Lenzner, who until very recently was the chief of staff to Director Wray at the FBI. And then my understanding is before that you were acting U.S. attorney for the District of Maryland, and then had your own risk advisory firm for a long time. So Jon is gracious enough to give us a view inside the FBI, which maybe I'll start there. I think for a lot of people in this room, and I think if you were here at last year's conference, we had some of the folks from the FBI who dealt very specifically with the crypto cases and very knowledgeable about the technology. But you sit at a much higher role than that. And maybe you can start by, my understanding is the FBI is 38,000 people. Give the crowd a little bit of an understanding of what your role is and what your role vis-a-vis Director Wray has been like, and what your experience with him has been as he comes up on a transition period away from the agency.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you to the Blockchain Association. Thank you to Jason and your team. And I should just say at the outset, I'm sure you've heard this before, today I'm here in my personal capacity. What I say does not necessarily represent the department and the Bureau's opinions. And by the way, can you all hear me in the back? Great. So one thing that always amazes me about the Bureau, even after 3 years in this role, is the breadth, the depth, the complexity of the threats facing America that the Bureau handles. We handle everything from gangs, cartels, public corruption, to financial fraud, terrorism, foreign spies, weapons of mass destruction, cyber attacks. And what impresses me about the Bureau is how they are able to work to stay ahead of those threats, often in collaboration with the private sector. And one of the things that we have tried to do in the last few years is to be very deliberate and thoughtful about the threats that we're seeing today, and also those threats on the horizon, even the ones that we can't see. And we do that by making sure that we're working with our private and public sector partners to gather intelligence, look for trends, and make sure that our capabilities are tailored to meet those threats, the ones that we don't even know about that are over the horizon. And as the chief of staff, I work with the director, the deputy director, we're the senior executive team overseeing the Bureau. And one of the things that I focus on is trying to keep our strategic objectives moving forward. And we are a 38,000 person agency. We have people all over the United States. We're in 100 countries around the world. We're also an intelligence agency as well as a law enforcement agency. And so there's a lot to manage. And there's pushing those objectives forward, which are important to our mission to protect Americans, but also to manage the scrutiny that we get from the public, from Congress, our oversight committees, the media, Inspector General, et cetera. And we all see sometimes organizations who can get overwhelmed by that scrutiny and have a hard time moving their own goals forward. And so I've tried to make sure that we handle that scrutiny in a responsive way, being as transparent as we can, but also making sure that it doesn't knock us off course, because we have to move those objectives forward for the sake of the Bureau and for the country. So finally, to your question, working with Director Wray has been just a terrific experience. He is strategic, he's smart, he cares a lot, he cares about doing the job right, he cares about making sure we do every case in the right way, which is why he brought so much rigor to the Bureau. And also, he really cares about the people of the Bureau, their families, and he cares about keeping Americans safe. And so the last thing I'll just say is he has really strengthened relationships with the private sector. He's improved recruiting, brought on more tech-savvy workforce. He's really prioritized innovation. And I think that he's done a great job for the Bureau and for the country.
Yeah, my experience, limited as it is, with the Bureau staff is some of the smartest people who understand some of the most detailed nuances about the crypto ecosystem, and been very impressive to work with them in my short period at Chainalysis over the last year and a half. I wanted to pick up on one of the topics you mentioned earlier, which is kind of sitting in your role and figuring out what the priorities are, and kind of analyzing the threats that fall within the areas that the FBI is thinking about as kind of top of mind. One of the things that you were mentioning backstage was like, it's not like you pick an industry and say, hey, the crypto industry is someplace that we need to target. On the other hand, like evolving technology generally, I think is probably presenting some pretty difficult questions for law enforcement to deal with. I mean, I know, as I said, like Chainalysis spends a lot of time with your agency and kind of getting them up to speed on that front. But topics like AI, I think I've looked at your budget. Like cyber is the place where a lot of focus gets spent time. Maybe you can give folks a little bit of an understanding of how you have seen the priorities, from your position. Kind of how have those shifted, and like where does crypto and cyber fall in terms of some of that prioritization?
Sure. So the threat landscape from the Bureau's perspective, it's complex, it's diverse, it's always evolving. And to give you just a quick sample, every morning we have a 8:30 a.m. threat briefing where the heads of each division briefs us. There's 30 divisions as to the biggest threats of the day. And so, counterterrorism, we're tracking ISIS terrorists somewhere in the country. Counterintelligence, we have these Chinese government spies we're tracking, et cetera, et cetera. And by the end of the briefing, by the way, you feel like you just binge watched the entire series from a Netflix thriller. And that's just Monday. But one of the most fulsome briefings every day is the cyber division, because ransomware attacks, intrusions, hacks, and then a whole assortment of cyber-enabled crimes are on the rise. I mean, just putting aside even things that you've heard about like Salt Typhoon, I mean, we've had an unbelievable increase in ransomware attacks. 75% of our critical infrastructure is held by the private sector, and so we have had to work very closely with them because 14 of 16 critical sectors have been hit by ransomware in recent years. And so the cyber division is the busiest, they're the fastest growing, and when you look at things like advanced technologies, whether it's AI and crypto, that have expanded the threat landscape that we have to protect, we have to be very deliberate in working with foreign partners to make sure that we are gathering intelligence from them and sharing, and also with the private sector. And so the private sector, I can tell you, is probably one of the most important partners as we move forward as an agency to guard against the threats from AI. I mean, AI, for example, we've seen already how criminals and nation-state actors are using AI to make better bombs for terrorists, how child predators are using AI to victimize more kids with sextortion, fraudsters using AI to trick the finance department of a company to wire $4 million overseas. So these are things that are very much on our radar, and the budget and the resources are going there.
So one of the things we talked about in the lead up to this was that you've spent a lot of time during your tenure focused on that kind of public-private relationship between the FBI and the private sector. For folks here, right, a lot of these folks are from specific companies. They get a call from the FBI. It's probably a little terrifying, right? And the threats that you talk about, right, ISIS or the DPRK, kind of seem a little unreal to them in terms of just tech innovators. But I'm curious, like, take us on a little bit of history lesson of what has your engagement with the private sector looked like? What are maybe some of the successes or examples that you think are kind of necessary as we kind of transition into the next phase of where the crypto ecosystem is going and where the Bureau is going, as to what you'd like to see kind of survive or change over time?
Sure. So the better collaboration with the private sector has been one of Director Wray's top priorities. And that's because there's so much data points held by the private sector in 2024 that we can't do our jobs protecting Americans without ongoing strong collaboration with the private sector. That's in particular with critical infrastructure and with emerging technologies. These are sectors and technologies where we can protect Americans at scale by working closer with the private sector. And when we think about working with companies that are investing and developing emerging technologies, we really think about it in three ways. The first is, how can we, the FBI, and also the greater law enforcement and IC, do a better job protecting Americans by understanding the technologies that can be weaponized against our companies, our citizens. And so that requires us having strong relationships with companies in your industry, with AI, with quantum, autonomous vehicles, drones, counter-UAS, et cetera. The second way we think about it is, how can we, the Bureau, take advantage of these technologies so that we can do a better job of protecting Americans? And that also requires the collaboration that we're talking about. Because our mission is to protect Americans and to uphold the Constitution. We take both parts of that mission statement seriously. And so we look to use technologies ethically and effectively to do our jobs. And then the third way is protecting American innovation and technology, because our mission to protect Americans includes American companies, American technology. And so we have decided a few years ago as an enterprise that we are going to help make sure that American companies, who are the leaders in a lot of technologies today, are protecting their technology from foreign governments, criminal groups. And we have invested a lot of resources to make sure that we are collaborative, not only at the national level, but every field office. We have 55 field offices. They are required to know the companies in their ARR and what they are doing and what they're working on. And so we've done things like spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley. I spent time in Austin, Texas, and Boston, meeting with companies, meeting with VC, to try to make sure that they understand that the Bureau is actually a friendly resource. It's a friendlier Bureau than maybe they remember from their TV days. And we're very victim-centric. And so we want them to call us to say, hey, we're going to invest in this country. What are the threats we should be aware of? Or, hey, we're going to onboard a number of employees from these countries. Anything you can help us with. And we want to have what we call this virtuous cycle of information sharing, where companies are coming to us and we're happy to provide them information. Then we hope that they will share back with us when they see things that we're not aware of. They provide us that information. We take that information, run it through our holdings or through the holdings of our IC partners. And then once we get their data points and our data points, then we can see the complete picture as to who's targeting American companies. And then we take that information and we go out to the industry. We try to provide briefings, bulletins, to make sure that everybody is aware of who's coming for their IP, who's coming for their trade secrets, who's coming for their technology, so they can protect it. Because at the end of the day, we're all Team America, and so we're trying to make sure that our companies can be the best in their industries in terms of the portfolio that we, the Bureau, are protecting.
Yeah, I mean, is there any like particular examples or success cases you can kind of speak to in that environment, or like also maybe practical advice for the room in terms of like, you know, what is it like? Is it reach out to your local field office? Are there programs that are out there that they should look at to potentially engage with the Bureau?
Yeah, I mean, most companies who we work with don't, you know, they want us to be somewhat discreet about it. I can tell you that we've developed different like founders initiatives where we've worked with venture capital to identify their founders who are going to be working in the areas that we are most concerned with, those emerging technologies. And what we have found by having high level and then also more working level meetings with these companies and these founders, that once they understand what we offer and that we are really there as a victim-centered organization, then they've been very eager to come back again and again and again. And so I would just encourage companies to not only know the Bureau at the national level, but also at your field office level. The special agent in charge is somebody who should have you on speed dial and vice versa. Because when, going back to that 8:30 a.m. briefing, when the cyber division briefs, you know, every day there's like 3 or 4 cases they brief, very significant. And almost without fail, the ones that are complete disasters, where a company gets hacked or there's a ransomware and it goes on for weeks and they're crippled, is where there was not a pre-existing relationship with the Bureau. And then the ones where there was a success story, where we already had that relationship, they knew people in their field office, they called them, and we were able to help them mitigate the threat and the damage. Those success stories were where there was already a pre-existing relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting, like from the vantage point that I have at Chainalysis, like speed is such an important issue in this kind of new technology age of criminal activity, right? Like you think about some of the activity on the blockchain, you know, we all know here, like assets can move almost instantly. And so those opportunities to kind of intervene are limited and like important. And I'm sure it probably requires a little bit of new thinking and new technology and new priorities to be able to move as quickly as that, and really depends a lot on the private sector relationships. One of the points you were discussing earlier is kind of the Bureau's own ability to leverage some of technology for its ends, not just, you know, looking at the threats that get borne out by using that technology. I was wondering if like there's any specific examples you can think of. I think for the folks in the room, like a lot of people are aware of the Next Gen AI case, whereby the FBI actually issued its own token as part of an operation. But you know, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that case, or just generally like the Bureau's own adoption of some of this technology. What does that look like, and what's that, you know, process been?
Sure. Well, we work obviously well with your company and others. You know, there's been cases like a bank CEO in Kansas who stole $47 million, converted to crypto, sent it overseas. There were 2 companies in particular, I believe, who were very helpful in having that money restored to the victims. The Next Fund AI case was interesting because that's a case, you know, the first time I think where we, the feds, have charged financial services firms for market manipulation related to the crypto market industry. And it's also the first time that I think any law enforcement agency in the US created a company, a token, a website for the purpose of a criminal investigation. And you know, people often ask, like, you know, why did the Bureau go to all that trouble? And you know, as you said in the beginning, you know, we don't target industries. We target crimes and threats. And so when we have some predication, when information comes, like in that case, from investors, that we have to try to uncover the criminality while not going beyond what our authorities allow. And so with newer industries, we just don't have the networks, the sources. We don't have that base of knowledge that you have on Wall Street or the trading markets in Houston with energy. And so we have to look for new creative ways to get at the underlying criminal conduct, especially with things now with, you know, encrypted communications. You know, the Bureau's ability to capture those incriminating conversations has dropped dramatically. Even if you have a T3, a wiretap or something, it's harder to actually get at those communications. So having that undercover operation with Next Fund AI was key, and we were very fortunate to have some very helpful private sector guidance on how to do that. And I think it's important not only for the Bureau, but also I think for the industry to work together to target the bad actors who are weaponizing the new technologies.
So we just have a minute left. I thought maybe like we sit at a moment where there's a transition going on at the FBI, right, including for yourself. I'm not asking you to kind of predict the future, but I guess, as somebody who left the government about 1.5 years ago, it's a little bit easier to be like, hey, this is what I think they should do now that I'm less accountable to that. But if you could look forward a little bit and what do you think the changes or the evolving threats that are coming that you think are worth prioritization with the new FBI should be? Do you have any kind of view on hey, where should things go?
Look, all I can say on that is when we set priorities, it's based on data, it's based on trends, working with all of our IC partners, our foreign government partners, private sector partners. So the priorities we set are not just the whim of one person. They are based on data, where the threats really are. And I think the most important thing is to continue to think outside the box and imagine what can happen, because with emerging technologies, we can't get complacent, and we have to always be looking over the horizon. So I expect that the next team will continue that trend, because the alternative is obviously something that can be very dangerous for the country, and it's kind of a zero-fail mission. So I expect that they will continue in the same direction, I would imagine, in terms of what the threats are and prioritizing.
Well, thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate this, and thank you for your service. And thanks, everybody, for joining us.